What's going on, fellas? I'm in a good mood today. So we're going to do, or not so, we were going to do regardless, but I'm extra prepared to do, I believe, questions number 57. If that's not what it says in the title, I'm wrong. But the series where I sit down, answer your lifting related questions, and hopefully help you guys a little bit with your efforts to get stronger. I'm looking forward to doing this one. I realized I need to just relax a little bit. I'm always a little on edge when making the videos because, there's lots of negativity on the internet. I want to make sure that I'm phrasing things in a way that they're airtight. People can't be mean to me. And I think it maybe makes it a little bit more contrived than it needs to be in terms of giving practical advice. Got to probably get a little bit thicker skin and get better at shrugging off stupid shit on the internet because there are stupid people. So we're going to get straight into the questions because I'm good to go. The first one, hot take. Gas station ready, while pretty cheesy, is actually a quite good strength philosophy thing. If you can only express your strength by warming up for ages, needing the right bar/bars, needing the right belt, needing this perfect sleep and diet, it doesn't really count for much. I do not agree with you, actually. I get where you're coming from here, but I would say that that's a little bit of a myth. If you find me a guy that, under ideal circumstances, when he's slept well, if he's got his right bar and he warms up for a while, he can conventional deadlift 800. I will show you a guy that's still pretty goddamn strong in his worst day. It doesn't mean he can fight. It doesn't mean his endurance is good. Maybe those are things that if you care about them, they should be worked on in addition to your strengths. But in terms of having strength, needing to warm up, I think, is largely a byproduct of if you're very strong and you're making efforts to get stronger, you're kind of fatigued all the time, the body's slow to get warm, you have to do some warm-ups on top of just the highly specific ones that many people can get away with earlier. Not have to, but often I find that to be the case. They would be strong without the warm-up. There's just a bit of injury risk there. I'm not sure that's something you can train away. Just cold starting your workouts, I don't think makes you all that more resilient to cold starting your workouts. Needing the right bars, sure, we should be able to train well even if we drop into a YMCA. I tend to agree. Maybe we're not going to be able to do the program as scheduled because when you're getting stronger and stronger, those things certainly matter. Pretending they don't matter or thinking that we're so diesel that it doesn't matter. Even for the best guys, the equipment still matters. Even if they're the kind of guy who can go and put up a crazy number in an LA Fitness, it's still not what they would have hit if they were on a deadlift bar because it's easier. Needing a belt. Again, if this guy can pick up 800 with a belt on, he's certainly going to be able to probably pick up 700 without it, even if he doesn't really address it. So I don't necessarily think that having that anytime, anywhere strength is something that needs to be trained for. Maybe you could argue that if his strength is hyper-specific to certain lifts, maybe a little bit more training would be needed for kinds of strength that are going to apply to the real world. I always love sandbag carries. I love pull-ups for that kind of thing. And I love squats for that kind of thing. Those are kind of my favorite three. I don't know. I don't agree. I get where you're coming from, but the way I view it, right, is like gas station ready. You got to be ready to do something at any moment's notice, right? And that's kind of the purpose of our physical training is to become a physical person. And so if you have such a glaring hole in your physicality that something that might be randomly called upon you in life is past your capabilities, that's probably something we should train to avoid. So being a fat power lifter, right, who let's say someone comes up to you at a gas station, you get in a fight, that doesn't end in a minute and you gas, you're going to get your ass kicked. So having just a little bit of conditioning, you know what I mean? This is kind of all around maintaining some level of holistic physicality to where if you needed to carry someone out of a building, you probably could get it done. You don't need to train to be the best carry building outer of all time. I don't know. I like gas station ready. I do agree it's quite cheesy, but I think that's kind of the appeal to it. But I don't necessarily think that cold starting your training or avoiding knowing what you're doing with equipment and belts, I don't think that's necessarily something that's going to make you that much better for it. Long-winded first question, because I've been mulling this one over while I was eating my last meal because we're prepping for a semi-heavy lower day tomorrow, so wish me luck there. The next one is I'd love a video where you talk about your view on dynamic double progression, double progressing a rep range versus step or wave loading, strengths and weaknesses, and when you would choose one over the other. So I'm going to attach a big caveat here at the beginning, which is that I do not really work with beginners, and I haven't for a long time. Obviously, I have some speculation as to what I think are good ideas, and thankfully for beginners, most things are going to work similarly well. Maybe some things I would speculate are going to set them up for more success when they become a intermediate lifter or an advanced lifter. The habits they learned early, they're going to look back and say, oh, thank God I did things that way. But it's not something I do. So I would not consider myself an expert at coaching beginners by any means. Not that your question is beginner. We're going to get to kind of what I was going to mention there. I coach intermediates and mostly advanced guys at this point. I've probably coached like 30 plus people to a 405 bench press at this point. So it's like, it's not that, oh, everybody I coach instantly benches 405 from being a beginner. I'm obviously I'm starting working with guys predominantly who are already in the 300s or something. So that being said, I think when we're very early in our training career, we can get away with very simple progression schemes that lack periodization, and they're purely just linear. They're not dynamic in any way. Just like a 5x5 routine. And there are benefits and cons to taking a linear approach early in your training. There's no reason necessarily that a beginner couldn't begin a periodized progression, but we learned how to push hard. We learned how to strain to maintain our form by adding load each session. Cool. Eventually, we move to the point where we need to have something that's a little bit more dynamic for our main lift. Maybe we could talk about these progressions fitting that spot, maybe not. And then eventually, for our main lifts, we need to move to something that's a bit more heavily periodized, whether that be RPE based, whether that be percentage based, whether that be more of a vague training protocol, as some people have a lot of success with, where they're just like, I work to a heavy 5 for this phase, and then I hit some moderate back off 8s. There's no percentage there. There is no RPE there, but there's a concise training plan that will probably work if executed reasonably. We got this top one. We obviously don't want our form going to shit, but it has to be quite hard. And then we've got these back off sets. If the person has kind of understood what general intensity they need to be hitting to move themselves forward and what point they're just drilling bad patterns, that vague of a plan can work. But we need to start having like a periodized approach to our top set. Where I would use things like what you mentioned, the dynamic double progression. What else were we talking about? Step loading, things like that. I think you could do on your main lifts in that intermediate phase, or if you're an advanced lifter and you're returning to peak condition on a lift, like, I haven't trained this lift in a while, I'll just run a dynamic double progression, or, I'll just wave load it. That's fine. That'll work just fine. I think eventually we probably need to go to one of these more periodized, more long-term laid out approaches on our main lifts. It's just a transition that people eventually need to make. I did the same thing in my lifting career where I was like, okay, cool, 5x5, add a weight every week. 5x5 isn't working. Even if I drop it back, I can't really adapt at that rate anymore. I'm not spending very long in that sweet spot. It's going from too easy to too hard too quickly. Then I was like, I'll do like a daily undulating linear progression where I do like 3x3 on day 1, 3x10 on day 2 later in the week, and try to add to those. And that I rode out for quite a while. And then at that point, I kind of was like, okay, we need to start moving to one of these more robust training block systems. However we want to break that down, whether it be like an emerging strategies approach, we need to do something a little bit more complicated. And I kind of skipped over using a middle level complexity scheme on my main work, and I'm kind of glad I did. I think it gave me more opportunities to understand like what phase of training is for what. You could overlay a dynamic double progression where our goal system periodizes with time, and that works just fine. But I usually skip past it for most of my athletes in terms of like how we're progressing the main lifts. I apply that stuff primarily to maybe variations and accessories. I've talked about how I think gamifying your accessories is what matters as an accountability system to just plug in hard sets. However many hard sets our program calls for or our body needs, we create different games to make sure we keep coming in with that effort. And I would say that things like wave loading the accessories, things like step loading, things like dynamic double progression are all things that I would rotate in just kind of when I feel like an accessory or like a supplemental motion becomes stale. But it's not something I've necessarily applied all that much to my main stuff, and it's not really my cup of tea for the main lifts. I think that would be my general thoughts. I would say that because we're implementing them into like supplemental motions, I would say that the differences between them aren't ultimately all that important. I would say the differences at that point are largely psychological. Like what game is fun for the person? What are they going to bring effort to week after week after week? If you just think that dynamic double progression for some reason is the most boring shit in the world, we can do a lot of other things to try to bring that accountability for these more hypertrophy focused accessories. So I would say in that regard, they're kind of interchangeable. I would say that if we were using them on our primary motions, we would have this list of strengths and weaknesses for like a traditional step loading approach, like a straight sets step loading or a straight sets rep target system. Or if we were doing our dynamic double, there would probably be a larger list of, pros and cons I could give you and how to make that choice, but I'm never really implementing those on the deadlift. I'm never really implementing those on the squat. Maybe if I'm in a retraining phase, that's the kind of thing I would absolutely throw into my overhead or my bench. But past that, once I'm in good condition and I'm aiming to reach all-time PR condition, not really my cup of tea, I would say. What do you think of doing Josh Bryant style cluster sets for isolation movements at the end of a workout? Curls, tricep extensions, rear delts, leg curls in the context of strength training on the larger lifts and their close variations. That's a good question. So I don't know off the very top of my head what Josh Bryant's cluster sets method is. I remember that he's got like cluster singles. Obviously, we're not hitting cluster singles for isolations. I think that'd be a very slow and ineffective way to accumulate volume. Let's just assume it's a rest pause. Like, okay, we put a weight on there that we can do for like 15. We take it to failure. We take like 10, we count 10 breaths, go again, 10 breaths, go again. Like a traditional kind of rep pause scheme. I would say that's fucking awesome. Any way we can build in more intensity. I don't think that there's anyone listening to this that in phases further away from maxing wouldn't benefit from building in more schemes to bring more intensity to their isolation lifts. I don't think that there's anyone in here that's routinely working so hard that any harder would be purely detrimental on their triceps. So building in different ways to gamify really, really high intensity with these past failure techniques is awesome. I'm guessing that's the cluster set thing that we're talking about. If it's lower reps than that, I would probably use more of that rest pause thing I just laid out. Maybe take a 12 rep max, breaths go, breaths go. You can fiddle with the number of breaths. You can fiddle with that first rep range, like the weight that you're taking. Maybe you could do a Widowmaker, which is just like however many total rounds it takes you to get to 30 reps or 40 reps or 20 reps or whatever it is. But there's lots of different games we can play. We can add in drop sets. We can add in partials. We can add in assisted reps if we have a training partner, all on top of the different ways that we can gamify these accessories. Because I wanted to make a video about triceps at some point with just some little goofy scheme that I rotate in there because I like it. Like I said, we're rotating in schemes we like to keep the accountability. There's like some picture out there of, I think it's like Buddhist monks, the spot that they stand on the floor, there's footprints from always standing in the exact same spot every day. And that's kind of the way I like to think about my tricep training is 3 days a week, just as the sun will rise on the horizon every morning, I will be doing my 4 hard sets of triceps. It used to be more, currently 4 is kind of the number, but I'm going to bust ass on triceps and really give it a go 3 days per week without fail with this religious level consistency. And different games allow me to do that. Through time, I've done the 100 rep in as few sets as possible system. I've done time intervals. I've done straight sets with a rep target system. I've done straight top set and then straight back offs. Straight top set and then drop sets. I've done, like I said, I've done rest pauses. I've done partials. And I think that the intensity techniques are an awesome thing to get in there to really get through your head how hard you can train and how hard of training you can benefit from. So kind of open-ended, doesn't really address the specific Josh Bryant protocol, but that would be my thoughts. Let's see. Any thoughts on training modalities that consist of big compound lift immediately followed by sprint, jump, weighted carry, ballistic exercise? Do you think it has merit as a way to improve one's athleticism? Yeah, I would say that moving your body through space in these dynamic ways, you get better at moving your body through space in dynamic ways. Do I think it outperforms like a dedicated session of these same things of jumping and sprinting and carrying and plyos? Not necessarily, but it's a way to build it into your training without adding much training time. So we're not going to meaningfully take away from our results on, let's say, the squat by doing a single, broad jump or single box jump between each set. Even a double or a triple, we're probably not, once we condition to it, going to really negatively impact the results of the squat session all that much. We're not going to add much meaningful training time, and suddenly we're checking that box that we weren't checking before of really challenging our ability to move our body through space explosively. So yes, super effective. It's more so just the inclusion of those exercises consistently over time than it is its proximity to the main lifts. But it absolutely is a very, very good way to do so. And there's a reason a lot of good athletes do that, or a lot of good lifters do that. I will say that, yeah, it's just a matter of like frequently challenging your like kinesthetic awareness is a lot of what just comes down to being an athletic person. That's why I don't hate those goofy Instagram drills as much as some of the coaches I know, where people are doing all this goofy ladder stuff and spinning. And, it's just a fun challenge for the day. It keeps the training interesting for the athlete. Are there any physical adaptations that are unique to that goofy ladder drill? Absolutely not, but it's novel. It gives the athlete something that's new and they want to master for the day. Maybe it can keep the engagement high. And it's just kind of checking that box of, okay, we're throwing a new look at you each week for how to get good at moving your body through space. When I was at my peak of athleticism, I would say was when I was boxing and I had just started lifting. And then also depending on the season, I also might play soccer. I might run track. It was mostly just this idea of like, okay, across the week, I'm going to be asked to do all these varied things. I'm going to show up to soccer practice. We have these drills. I've got this running. I'm going to do this lifting. We've got this boxing. We have lots of drills for boxing. And I always like doing like physical challenges for myself, just like broad jumps for a whole, like a city block or something. And it was just the fact that it was constantly challenging that kinesthetic awareness, and you get better what you challenge. And that's kind of, to me, at its cornerstone. Athleticism comes down like your ability to like output force paired with having really good bodily awareness, both of which can be trained. What movements do you use specifically to build the front squat lift other than itself? If possible, free weights only for the garage gym people out there. I hate to be that guy, but I'm predominantly using the front squat to build the front squat because I have a lot of things because I've got all these strongman motions and I've got these fundamental strength motions for the upper and the lower body. I've got a lot of things in my training that I'm doing. I don't really have enough training economy to say, okay, I do front squats and I do these 3 other motions to build the front squats. I'm doing the front squats to build the front squats. It happens that a couple of other things I think will help with that, but I'm not doing them to assist in building up the front squat because while the front squat is a great one of my training goals and it has very good effect in a lot of things, it's not so much better than everything else that I can allocate all of these exercise slots to it. In weightlifting, there's kind of this school of thought that, okay, we want to build our front squat using our back squat because it lends itself to kind of putting in more volume. So we build up the legs with the high bar back squat. We do enough front squatting that we have this like position specific strength to maintain our positions. We have like some level of technical proficiency at the lift. Usually we'll be high bar squatting for all kinds of rep ranges. We'll be doing the front squats maybe for lower rep ranges, often with a long pause at the bottom. And then maybe in many systems, you'll also see a heavy front rack hold to kind of build up that isometric T-spine strength. And the combination of these 3 things seems to result in a pretty good front squat. But it's worth noting that they're not training to front squat as much as possible. They're training to front squat enough. Once they front squat a certain amount more than they could reliably clean, it's kind of just arbitrary at that point because it's not a strength development exercise as much as it is like this pseudo-specific motion for them. So maybe if they were trying to front squat as much as possible, they would not build the front squat or with back squats. They would be doing more front squatting. Who knows? But I would say that's perfectly viable. So the high bar squat you can do in your home gym will certainly help your efforts. Paused front squats will certainly help your efforts to improve your front squat for sure. Rack holds for some people are a good use of time. For other people, they should probably just be focusing on their mobility and their leg development rather than doing heavy rack holds. weighted planks I find quite helpful. Keeping on top of my mobility I view as part of my training for a front squat. If I'm not flexible, my front squat goes like shit because my bar path is off. And it puts me in this position where there's no way I'm going to have the thoracic strength to maintain that position. So doing my mobility training. And then the last one that I do find a lot of luck with is any carry where the weight is in front of you. Kind of builds up that ability to hold, like you're holding something in front of yourself, you're holding something in front of yourself. There's going to be some innate carryover there. But those would be my thoughts. Not potentially the most helpful in the world, but we'll see. The next one, Hafthor announced that that he is after the powerlifting all-time world record total within a year. How would you program his training for a year to get him there? Well, if I do a really, really good job of feeling really smart, hopefully it would look something like whatever Sebastian's going to write down. Sebastian's like highly specialized with working with athletes of that strength level. Strength comes back really quickly. If you want my hunch, they're going to do a very, very long progression rather than block, block, block. It's going to be a very long progression with the goal date in mind. If my memory serves, I believe what they did when prepping for his 1,000-pound deadlift is they started down at like 35, 45%. At the time, it wasn't actually 35, 45% because I'm pretty sure they based their percentages off of the target weight. When you have someone that's going to end the block way stronger than they're starting the block, that kind of often is necessary. So if you have, let's say, athlete that uses a lot of PEDs, their strength comes down a lot. I think that people could maintain their strength better than they do. I think the problem is people are like, well, you can't be strong without the gear. It becomes a mental crutch. And so when they aren't like blasting, they're also not training hard and they're not eating their food right. And they're not like giving everything they've got. I think they could actually maintain a much higher strength while off than people perceive. So they see like, like Larry got off. Well, Larry also stopped training seriously. Or Larry's on TRT. Like Larry kind of backed off of a lot of things. Same thing with like Thor. They're like, oh, he deflated. Look at what he is without gear. Not that he could get that big without gear, but I think you'd be surprised how much he would have maintained if he just continued like his world strongest man prep style approach. Unrelated, let's say you have a guy who he's detrained, he's going to get back on the gear, and he's going to retrain. We'd probably, because unless we want to have like this constantly changing estimated training max, we're probably going to build a program that starts very low and builds off of our target goal. And I believe that's what they did for Thor for his 1,000. And they started down in this like 350 to 450 range while he was detrained, and he might be able to get a little training effect out of that. The other things they did was they moved up onto a deficit and used a snatch grip to make this low percentage relatively taxing. So they use this to kind of build up some hypertrophy and some work capacity. And then at like 50%, they transitioned over to, I believe, more comp specific pulls. I'm kind of pulling the numbers out of my ass here, but bear with me. And then the other thing that they did that I think would be like the big thing to note, so they're doing this very long, drawn-out progression, starting at a much lower percentage than you'd think, because it's not that low of a percentage at the beginning due to the detrained state. They use variations to make that lower training percentage more difficult, build up very gradually over time. And then the other thing is usually people who reach that extremely exotic level of strength all kind of operate off of the same frequency. So there's a reason how the Lilliebridge family has influenced so many of the top lifters, from Sebastian Oreb and through Sebastian Oreb, Hafthor, to the Lilliebridges, to Dan Bell, the current record holder. And I think the real magic of the Lilliebridge program is they just figured out what the recovery curve looks like when you squat 1,000 pounds and deadlift like 900 plus. It's every other week is the frequency. And that's kind of the crux of the Lilliebridge method, and the genius of the Lilliebridge method isn't really in the progression scheme, it's in the frequency. It's in the training split and moving to a bi-weekly split when you get that strong. It's the same reason I don't think it's a great program for those of us that are not inhumanly strong, because there's no reason to wait that long between our heavy lifts, because it's not take that long to recover from ours. The genius is when we're that strong with this very small group of people, we can probably do a heavy squat and a light deadlift one week and a heavy deadlift and a light squat the other. And that's kind of the crux of the Lilliebridge method. I don't think the progression scheme is anything that magical. I think that the progression schemes that Sebastian overlays on top of this training frequency are probably better. And I know they're going to use that I don't know what percentage when they start getting up there in weight, but they're going to move to heavy squats week A, heavy deadlifts week B. Keep the squats working reasonably hard because I know Sebastian likes driving a training effect with those, even if the focus is on the deadlift. Having a strong squat was a big goal, and now that he's doing a powerlifting meet, obviously the strong squat is going to be extremely important. I'm assuming he'll probably do SSB squats on the B week to spare the arms from the beating they're taking with like 800, 900 pound low bars. So all I can tell you is based on what I've observed from what training looks like for people that strong, we're going to be looking at like an every other week frequency, basing our training off of our goal and building backwards. And then we are going to be looking at, I don't know what else to add. Basically, the more I could make it look like what I've seen 1,000-pound squatters and 1,000-pound deadlifters train like, the better job I'm doing. I know Eddie Hall actually in his prime also used the deadlift heavy every other week. So it's certainly, there are some exceptions. You know, Jeff Caron will pull heavy twice a week as a 1,000-pound deadlifter, but I would say that's the exception, not the rule. Let's do a couple more. Thoughts on rotational work for strength athletes? Worth investing some time into? I don't think you're going to die if you don't. I like including it because as we get really good at resisting motion through our core, we tend to stiffen up. And just doing a little bit of rotation work can preserve just a little bit of rotational ability that we might need to call upon if we want to go to the driving range with our friends or something. Don't think it's going to be the worst thing in the world if you don't, but it's very easy to add in, and I think that if people tolerate it and they like it, I just like throwing in some sideways med ball tosses whenever I can. I think that it is a good idea that if you got the time and you got the interest, I would do. How do you move up in into a volume/hypertrophy training block after a strength peak? Do you jump right into the deep end with high rep sets, or do you build back up into it? I jump right up into the deep end. I usually will take a pretty light weight, and I will rely on the fact that my work capacity is detrained. So I'm going to be limited more by my work capacity than I am my muscles, and that's what I want. If I was limited by my muscles, I think a rapid spike in volume would be quite dangerous. In fact, that's one of the few things we have a little bit of research on being a predictor of injuries, a rapid spike in training volume. Thankfully, we're going to be limited by our wind and our work capacity pretty harshly. So if we put on like 60% to the bar and hit 4 working sets, we're going to be pretty muscle sparing and pretty burnt out. And so that would be how I would jump back in, and I would almost use that lack of work capacity as my buffer, but I would get right back into sets of 8 or whatever. How do you feel about combining high reps and low weight in the same bench sessions? Example, working set 1 and 2 with 8 to 12 reps, working sets 3 through 5 with 1 to 3 reps. I feel super warmed up for the heavier working sets and can easily accommodate to the fatigue by using slightly less weight. So that's something that early in a training cycle, I like that kind of thing. If I feel, okay, this athlete needs to have like just a little bit of a touch with the lower reps, early in the training cycle just to keep their familiarity, I might have them do that after their volume work if they're capable. That way we're kind of pre-fatigued. We don't need to put as much weight on the bar to challenge what a difficult 1 to 3 rep set might look like. And then as we transition later in the block, we can probably move that heavier work ahead of the volume, and the volume becomes back off work. And then we see this, okay, well now we're not pre-fatigued. We see this jump up there. So I'm not averse to it, although I would say the stronger you get, it becomes a little bit less viable. But I'm not averse to pre-fatigue work on the main lifts. I think it's just a strategy to get good work and challenging reps out of a little bit less weight, which there's a time and a place for. It shouldn't be a year-round thing. But I think some people I hear are very averse to this kind of thing. Like, just take anything that takes away from the quality of the top set is bad. And I don't necessarily think it's all just the quality of the top set. That's largely what's going to drive our like neural adaptation. But I think that the sum adaptation is a result of the sum workout, the sum workload. So doing some work before the top set isn't the end of the world. I just would get away from that as soon as I enter a strength phase personally. And I really like doing this on accessories where I don't necessarily care about the tonnage because it leaves me feeling very warmed up and I don't have to put as many plates on. So if I hop on a leg press, I'll probably hit my 20 repper before my 12 repper. Take some weight off for the 12 reps. Awesome. Feel nice and warm, feel nice and safe. And that way I don't have to stack as many plates on there, which is very nice. Yeah, maybe I'm missing out on a little bit of the absolute tonnage perspective there, but I don't really need to drive adaptation necessarily with absolute tonnage all the time. I think some people really over rely on that because I think that exposing yourself to absolute load, I think there's a question here somewhere about that. Exposing yourself to a higher absolute load can drive some like holistic adaptation. People make the mistake of noticing this at some point in their training career and thinking they found the holy grail, everything else sucks, I'm going to lean into this, and you can see it in the program. They see that doing some exposure to heavy weights drives this quick progression in their training. So whether it be like doing a rack pull, doing a reverse banded lift, doing a slingshot, doing a board press, doing a high box squat, doing a heavy unrack, doing these things where they're exposing their body to super maximal weights, they see this initial like bump up in strength and they're like, haha, I've figured it out. To lift more weight, I just need to find gimmicks that let me lift more weight and then I'll be able to do it on the comp lift eventually. And they see this big jump up and they kind of take advantage of that strength stimulus and they lean into it, and they miss out on a lot of the hypertrophic qualities, a lot of the lower position, like strength in the lower range of the lift. So whether that be quad strength in the squat, like quads, glutes, adductors, and they're just getting their back and posterior chain wicked strong with these like higher height lifts. The triceps are strong, but they got no pop off the chest, so they can do a massive 3-board, but their comp bench sucks because their chest is weak. They run into kind of what they're getting away from coming back and haunting them, I would say. And I would say that's a short-lived strategy to expose ourselves to maximal weights all the time to get these cheap gains, because those could be got at any point. We need to also grow the base, because the bigger the base, we can always play that super maximal weight exposure card if we really needed to. I don't think you even need to display your strength very effectively, but let's say we do. We can play that card, and that card, let's just say it's plus 30 pounds from wherever you're at. Well, if you've built up on sub-maximal volume work and these hypertrophy-focused work and bottom range-focused work, a 500 deadlift, we could play that card and cool, we're at 530. Whereas if you played that card at 300, we're now at 330. You got to now dial back anyway and just get back to doing the volume. Those would be my thoughts. That wasn't as well organized as it was in my head. Let's see. Let's say I'm going to train biceps and triceps in the same workout. Does it matter biceps or triceps first? Not particularly. I mean, the old Weider principle is whatever you feel is the less developed muscle goes first because you got more energy to focus on it. So that's what I would say. What do you think is the best split for getting big? Doesn't exist. Whatever you like to do, whatever lets you train hard, train the muscles semi-frequently. I don't think there is anything like a best split because I know lots of very big people with very different training splits. So I start to suspect that the thing that made them big wasn't the specific training split. All right, next one. Sam, I will drop both for you. Firstly, when coaching yourself, what would you say is a streamlined process to determine your MEV and MRV? We are often here in the industry that you have to work within this range of numbers, but everyone is a bit different. I've struggled in the past to find these values, and I feel, and I've finally honed in on myself, but I'm not sure I am sure I'm not a unique case. So my thoughts, wow, that was a brutal, I'm not sure if you guys have noticed, but I can barely read. Like I read at like a middle school level, and this is not a bit. This is not me being humorous. So bear with me with the question reading. It's not my strong suit. Never has been. I have no idea if there's something wrong with me or if I'm just dumb. As far as finding the MEV and MRV, no, it's not a super streamlined process. A lot of it is just looking at your training and keeping tabs on your recovery. If you're like, okay, well, I'm recovering easily every single week, let's add a little bit. Let's add a little bit. I'm not recovering well. I feel like shit. Let's drop back. And it's kind of an ever evolving thing because your MEV and your MRV are things that are going to change with time. If we're in a period where your life stress is really high and you're sleeping like shit, it'll come down. If things are going really well, the training will actually bring that upward. The amount of volume we can handle it's a thing we can train like anything else. It comes upward. Maybe at some point you're really dedicated with your diet, then you fall off a little bit. It's a constantly moving thing. So I'm not even as concerned with putting numbers on the MEV and the MRV to keep in my head that these are my magic numbers because they're going to change. It's more a matter of just trying to make sure my training falls somewhere in the productive range between the two at all times. So I'm just kind of keeping my thumb on my recovery and adjusting the program accordingly. So at some point, hanging out comfortably in my, like, let's just say max, like we got maximum and minimum. We've just got an effective training volume at some point somewhere in between. We're hanging out at that effective training volume. We're not redlining it up towards the MRV. That's going to go up and down with time. As long as we're staying in range and putting a lot of time within that range, preferably the upper half of that range, maybe if we want to say that, the better. So that's kind of what I would say is I'm not really super obsessed with finding the numbers because I know that those are kind of arbitrary anyway, and they're not necessarily something that's going to hold that much value for me a year from now. The skill of being able to regulate it is what holds value for me a year from now. Second, my hot take is currently the sport of strongman. Currently in the sport of strongman, as people are getting more interested in it, and we have people who go into strongman gyms and fuck around with every piece of equipment with no real idea what they're doing. What most strength-focused athletes need is to focus on base building rather than specificity to the sport of strongman. I will even see higher level coaches program these insanely specific strongman movements in the off season. Then the next week program a different movement. This feels like a huge waste of potential for a lot of budding strongmen. So this is something, it's like anything else. It's a spectrum, right? So it's like, okay, well, we've got these base building lifts, just have them power lift. Well, if you have a guy who's significantly weaker than a powerlifter but has high levels of event skill, he'll probably wax the powerlifter in a strongman contest. Having high event skill is this great equalizer, and it's always going to serve you well. However strong you are, you get to perform above and beyond that if you have enough little tricks and you have enough proficiency on each event to where, oh yeah, your shoulders aren't as strong as this guy, but you've got a split jerk and you actually chip him and you beat him outright on the max overhead event. If event skill can get you someone who's quote unquote stronger than you, obviously if you put more overhead, you put more overhead, via having high event skill, you know how to do this like a split stance start on the yoke. So you beat this guy he squats 100 pounds more than you, but you've been training your yoke. So it's a very good skill to have. But like you said, we also want to be building up our base physicality. And while the competition events can do that to some degree, we've also got these really good motions that are really good for building up our base physicality, like our squats, our deadlifts, our presses, and that kind of thing. And it's easy to go too far in either direction, right? It's kind of easy to be short-sighted and get this really high level of event skill and not be building our base for the long term. And it's also easy to be obsessed with the base building and then actually show up to a show and be shocked that the people that practice strongman are better at strongman than you. So I think it's kind of like maybe it's a pendulum swinging thing, because if we look in the past, it was probably overemphasizing the general strength and underemphasizing the sport-specific training. So maybe we're swinging past that point. I don't know. I'm the only strong man at my gym, so I don't really know what the word on the street is. But that would be my thoughts, is we're just trying to strike a balance. And that balance is going to look different for different people. If you're someone who's like, you're a quick guy, you're explosive, you're pretty coordinated, but you're just not really as statically strong as everybody, maybe a bigger percentage of your training. Maybe we're doing 4 strength-focused sessions during the work week and 1 event session on the weekend. Or if you're like, I'm pretty strong, but I'm losing to people weaker than me in shows. I need to get better at strongman, man. Maybe we're spacing events into every training session. Maybe it's squats and yoke and some stones as your session, rather than like squats and legs and then all the events go on the weekend. So just varies from person to person based on what needs to be done. I've found that while training for climbing / bouldering 2 times per week, I can't recover from as much total volume in the gym. For people that train for other sports but wanting to get generally big and strong, what are your thoughts on using 1 to 2 sets per muscle group in each session to get enough stimulus? training full body 3 times per week using mostly compound lifts in a home gym setting. Not comp style lifts, but like RDLs, SSB squats, Larsons. I would try to build a little bit more volume than that. I would say 3 to 6 working sets per week, unless you're quite strong, is probably going to be leaving a little bit to be desired. We're going to train up our work capacity. Maybe you can't recover from it now, but we build into it. I would try to build up a little bit more work capacity than that. Especially like squats, there's no reason your legs should be fried from your climbing. So there's no reason you shouldn't be able to handle like a reasonable working volume. Yeah, we've got this like systemic fatigue from the workload, but we can acclimate to these things. I would say unless you are pretty strong, in which case, drop me a comment and I might give you an updated opinion. But if you're not pretty darn strong, I would say let's build into a little bit more volume than that. Maybe let's try to hit 3 working sets, like a top set and 2 back-offs per session for each muscle group. 3 days per week, putting us at 9 sets. That'll probably get the job done, I would say. I'm just guessing. Now, when rowing/pulling horizontally or vertically, what are some of the whys behind different angles you aim to row towards? Low elbow, high elbow, what would you advise in the different varieties being used, variation-wise? Pulling higher, we're going to be targeting the upper back musculature, the rhomboid, the rear delt, the rear trap a little bit more. And if we're pulling lower, we're going to be biasing more towards the lats. That's kind of the long story short, is when we're pulling lower or with this like narrower grip, we're going to be biasing a bit towards the lats. And when we're pulling like wider and higher, we're going to be biasing a little bit towards the upper back. And it just depends on what muscles you're trying to hit with that accessory slot. That would be my advice. Oh, Jesus. All right, we got quite a few left. That'll be it for this one, so that way it doesn't turn into an hour-long video. Thank you, boys, for watching. I appreciate you. I enjoy doing these. As always, you got videos, ideas, leave them below. I will read it, and at the very least, I might not do it, but I'll have an idea of what it is that people want to see.